affected. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. So, if other, powers, external powers are not intervening or imposing their own decisions on these two countries, I think again there's internet connection problem.
No, we
I'm
can hear
audible?
you.
Okay. So there won't be any issue between them. So 1990s were a very optimistic kind of era where China and India both were coming closer, they were cooperating, they were, building together. But later on in late 1990s, 96, 97, it was a unipolar system that actually started dictating its policy to both countries.
Okay. But do you think that there is some border issues, mean geographical disputes? And on the other hand, just like you said, economic dependence is increasing, means the total trade like that. So what is the international relation perspective in this scenario, that if the internal environment is demanding a good relationship, but your relationships with the external powers demanding no relationship or limited relationship, so what situation develop in that situation?
It's kind of security dilemma actually. Knowing that they can, if they're cooperating, it's going to be win-win situation. But if they're not cooperating, then they won't be able to resolve their border disputes. They won't be able to resolve their historical confrontations, whether it's the Dalai Lamas or any other kind of grievances both countries are having. So it's kind of security dilemma. It's prisoner dilemma as well. One
Yeah.
securities, others insecurity, and then international powers are exploiting this situation. Only a sensible, wise leadership could, resolve this kind of dilemmas and insecurities, knowing their survival and their, development and progress, not only there but also of whole South Asia, depends on these two countries. Their confrontation means confrontation in whole South Asia, loose alliances, or balancing and counterbalancing efforts. So why to spend so much resources and so much potentials on such kind of issues? So it's kind of prisoner's dilemma. One securities and others insecurity, and then major powers are exploiting the situation.
Okay, but my question was that, for example, your internal environment, means the economic benefits of India, is demanding that there must be good relationship with China. But on the other hand, the partners of India, I mean, for example, USA, is demanding limited relationship with China. So who wins?
So right now, if you see both, it's a complex kind of situation. Knowing that for India, China is the largest trading partner. They cannot ignore the fact. Boycotting China or just only ignoring China and going to in American bloc is not possible for India, and it's very obvious from India joining BRICS and forwarding their agendas um, uh, with consensus, China, India, and Russia. So they're trying to balance it. They're trying to, win American support, and then they're also trying to somehow maintain their trade balance with China as well. So there's no win-win situation
Thank you,
on a
Zishan. Thank
global
you,
status.
Sadia. Thank you, Sadia. We move on to the next question. I think Zishan is more towards more on the economic side of that, so we can have another detailed one later on. And we have one question from Professor Gulodon. Pardon me if I am not pronouncing your name correctly. She is from professor from Turkey. So what India should do in order to gain support of regional countries? Is there any prospect of seeing change in the India's policy? And I will add another question, especially could you reflect internal discussion in India regarding the necessity of change its policy on Kashmir on other issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Ojam. Thanks a lot for your question, and thank you for coming as well. Well, what India can do again, the Robert Cox, new Gramsciism, somehow it's explaining the solution, giving the solution to India. If you want to play an important role in the region, if you want to be a hegemon of the region, you should play a very constructive, very positive role in overall region. You cannot, keep your aggressive policies and then your claims for hegemony simultaneously. So somehow, if India really wants to play a very important role, significant role in regional politics and want to maintain its preeminence, then it has to be very cordial with other nation. It has to resolve its border dispute with China, with Pakistan, with Bangladesh, water disputes with Bangladesh, and other countries also definitely, depending on somehow India, Nepal, and Bhutan, and now Afghanistan as well. Situation has been changed in Afghanistan, but what happened in post 9/11 period, India played a very, constructive role there. In another country, if you are doing your projects in any country, that is not recommended and required. You have to be soft power. You have to be a power that is constructive, that is positive, that is, pro peace, not pro conflict. It won't be justified to blame India only, definitely. But being a big country, a country that is, having proximity with all regional states, its responsibilities are bigger than any other country. So for India, if it wants to really acquire this status, require hegemony and preeminence, it has to, be more sacrificial and more indulged positively in other states in the region. And what was the second question? Sorry, let me read it from here.
So the second question was, especially could you reflect internal discussion in India regarding the necessity to change its policy on Kashmir and other issues? And again, I will connect to this, Sadia, I will connect to this internal discussion. So in current, we have another question from Faria Sarwar. So in current scenario, India as a pro-US state in region, do you see any change in their stance towards the new government in Afghanistan in coming days? Again, it's the internal discussion in India's part.
Well, internal discussion overall, knowing that, BJP hardliners are in power, and Modi government somehow, what actually changed internally in India in last 3-4 years after Manmohan Singh's tenure, BJP came to power, and knowing the BJP agenda, they are dividing the community and societies within India instead of building a more, peaceful kind of situation where people can concentrate on development and growth. So there are a lot of discussions going on from different political parties, regional and central parties, that, what could be the outcome of such kind of policies from Narendra Modi or BJP's government. So yes, there are a lot of positive, constructive voices, sane voices from India, from Arundhati Roy to other free and liberal school of thought people, that they believe in peaceful coexistence. We are all the time, criticizing Congress government for that, whenever there is a Congress party's government, some kind of clash is erupting between different states, or with India with China, or India with Pakistan, India with any other smaller state in the region. But we have to accept the fact that somehow Congress and people from the Congress are the hope for the country. If they are practicing secularism or practicing liberalism 100% or not, that's another debate. But at least they can come up with some kind of pro-peace initiatives. Initially, BJP government also did the same under Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He was a very sane person, but under new management, new administration of Narendra Modi, chances and prospects of peace are not that much bright. But definitely knowing now gestures from Pakistan's establishment and political and military establishment that they really want to cooperate, I think in future we can see a changed scenario if they keep on focusing on positivity and ignoring negativity, aggressive approach. And then what was the other question?
The other question was from
Farihaz. Okay, Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Well, Fariha, I think, yeah. So Fariha, thank you, Fariha, for the question. Well, in Afghanistan, I think what they invested over the last 2 decades there, it seems like, all in ashes. But knowing that Afghanistan, again, if they are accepting China's support and if they are asking for, American assistance in rebuilding Afghanistan, it would be possible for them to also accept India's, constructive role in Afghanistan. They somehow cleared that they won't allow India or any other country to use Afghanistan's territory for against any other country. So I think among people of Afghanistan, India's image is very positive. They prefer Indian, interference, Indian presence in Afghanistan as compared to Pakistani presence in Afghanistan. So that is one positive aspect that Taliban regime can utilize, but I don't expect, such kind of things from them. But let's see. So overall situation is not somehow, for some time period, is not in favor of India in Afghanistan. But if only if Taliban regime considered, reconstructing, rebuilding Afghanistan, then India's role is vital and very important, along with other regional countries.
Thank you, Sadia, for the detailed answer. So we have one more question. As long as India is the topic, so you will not have, the any shortage of questions. So Kashif Shahzad is asking, what should do Pakistan to build a good relationship with India, knowing the fact that the unresolved issues of Kashmir is still sustained and the Pakistan having a sympathy to Taliban's new government?
Well, Pakistan, what Pakistan can do, uh, again, here narratives are very important. We need to rebuild, re-narrate, our policies. In 21st century, where countries with sustainable democracy, sustainable economic growth are, rising, Pakistan cannot ignore its largest, its biggest, neighboring country in South Asia. Just imagine if our borders are open, we are having, good mutual relations, bilateral relations, we can come to a point where interdependence will somehow, compel us, force us to resolve our border disputes. Again, I have to mention China. Yes, we know that they're still having border disputes, Himachal Pradesh region with China, but overall situation is much better. There is no chance of any, full-fledged war with China. So if they can manage, despite, having a much better history with China, if they can maintain better relation, economic relation, why India and Pakistan sharing a lot of similarities, culture, history, geography, same kind of, habits even. Why can't we build up good relations with India? So yes, we have to start with, small steps. We have to restore our trust of people and trust of governments. And Kashmir issue, I think status quo is the only solution so far. And what happened over the last 3-4 years, we have witnessed that now there's not a lot of, resistance from Kashmiris even. Article 380 got, abolished, and later on, slowly, gradually, things are quite normal. And now even Pakistan is thinking to give the status of its fifth province to, Gilgit-Baltistan. So things are, I think, moving towards status quo again. But I think best solution for their border conflicts or their other conflict is to build trust, and it's only possible if we are, opening our borders, we are letting people meet each other, we are letting people communicate. Only then we would be able to create an atmosphere where we can sit and discuss and deliberate and come up with some peaceful solutions instead of, indulging ourselves in arm race, indulging our people in rivalries. Imagine almost 1.3 billion people in India and 200 million plus Pakistanis, and then we hosted whole organization SARC and our region just because of our rivalries. So if India and Pakistan are moving towards a better future by developing their trust, building their trust, and then opening their borders for free trade, free cultural communications, then I think only we can resolve our core issues as well.
Wonderfully answered, Sadia. So many times I've been from New Zealand. So many times examples are given to countries like Pakistan and India of relationship between the New Zealand and Australia. Australia as a bigger partner and New Zealand as a lower, it's a smaller partner. So, but we can see that some rifts are already being opened. So the new alliances are being built. So my question is regarding this: that the India is having a very key position in the Quad alliance, that is Japan, India, USA, and Australia. So what is India's, so this is the same question I think from Naveed Hamid, he is the Pakistan Association president in New Zealand. So what is India's, the role, and why is it only because India is against the China, or there is any natural alliance towards these countries because there are democratic countries and others are not so democratic, or there are some economic benefits, or what is for India in the Quad and other alliances?
Well, again, that counterbalancing strategy to counterbalance China, knowing that from South China Sea to all these sea line, major sea line of communications, all these countries are very concerned. America is concerned. Europe is concerned. So India can play a very active and very effective role in this alliance, in Quad and in AUKUS alliance. Knowing that very close to its strategic location can play wonders for other countries as well. America coming all from other a continent, it can't be that effective if India is active. Indian Navy is effective. That's why India is spending a lot on its Navy, investing a lot on its Navy, because knowing that this sea line of communication, trade through these communication, sea line of communication is very important. China is building a lot of projects, from One Belt, One Road to CPAC to other connectivity projects. So India can play an important role. And other than this strategic role, Indian economy, rising economy, somehow it also depending on energy resources from across the world, from Central Asia to Middle East to other parts of the world. So India's role is undeniable, and knowing that they're having their own rivalries, India and China. So that's why India is, I think, a very effective participant of Quad.
Thank you, Naveed,
And
for
in
your
near future, knowing that, again, as you mentioned, a new Cold War is, again, it's already is been launched. So China versus the world, China versus the America, China versus the Europe, America and its alliances, Quad is going to play an important role again. These countries definitely, they have their own interest, and they're having their own future plans. It's no more secret that they are planning to somehow counterbalance China in this region. So yes, it's going to be a very important alliance in future.
So if no one has any questions, so I got one question from my side. So
Yeah,
we know
please.
that the India is a economic superpower, and building its power, and also because of their purchasing power and lots of very huge population. So where do you see the India's soft power because of the Bollywood and all those dances and the music and the clothes and so many things we see here in New Zealand? Their second or third largest event in New Zealand is Diwali. Where do you see the India's soft power influencing other powers, the decision making?
Well, that is, undeniable fact. India, through its media, through its, soft power that it has created over the years, is present everywhere. It's not only New Zealand, so whole Middle East are very, all the time when we are boosting about Ummah and our Muslim brotherly countries, India is having total control culturally in these countries. and it's not, culture somehow isolately cannot do anything if Indian economy, Indian market is not that big. So Indian market, along with its soft power, is creating a huge impact worldwide. In Turkey, when I was in Turkey, I have witnessed a lot of cultural event sponsored by Indian embassies and Indian, people living over there. So yes, their cultural impact is massive. But we have to admit as well, now world is not ignorant and naive. They have access to countries' politics and their society, so they're also realizing that there are a lot of issues and problems in India, minorities issues, women related issues, and they're also having poverty. So it's not that only people are receiving certain kind of positive image of India without questioning the overall society. But yeah, we cannot deny the way India has created an image of a secular, democratic, a society of multi-ethnic society. So yes, it's very powerful. It's more powerful than the way we are portraying and the way we are promoting our own culture, or we are trying to promote Kashmir dispute. Just imagine at one side there is a lot of positivity, music, their historical, antiques. Then there very strong diplomacy. And then
whenever
yeah.
I try to tell people that the Indus Valley civilization is actually originated from Pakistan, so it's kind of a surprise to people, so this makes a lot of sense.
So this is soft power actually. India is able to convince people that India is the hub of historical and civilized, all the centuries old civilization. It's not Pakistan. So it was only possible through economic monopoly as well. If you are giving access to other markets, to your market, then only possible they are reciprocating the same way. So yeah, soft power plus their strong economy and their established democracy. All three are playing very important role in creating India's image, positive image.
Thank you, Dr. Sadia. So we have joined by Kaisar Rashid Saab. He is from New Zealand. He is a prominent member of Pakistani community. So Kaisar Saab, you joined a little late. So this session is the Indo-US strategic ties in the post-Cold War period and India's preeminence in South Asia. So you are open to ask any question regarding on this topic regarding India. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudhanshu, for the introduction. Well, the topic lies very close to my heart, and I'm actually rather a keen listener at this stage. And I realize that we have a subject matter expert who is actually, so no, it's okay. I've come, in fact, thank you for sharing the information. I would really like to hear at this stage, and of course, later stage when it's appropriate, I'll definitely make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So do we have any more questions from the audience? Actually, we are already around 30 minutes into our question answer session, and the session been started around an hour ago.
अच्छा, मेरे छोटे भाई ने अभी ज्वाइन किया, तो I can ask one question on behalf of him.
Sure.
Yeah. So the classical liberal school of thoughts means, for example, John Stuart Mill and these kind of people say that the good international policy, international relation is that there should be no intervention, no state intervention. Means no intervention by any country in the affair of any other country. And means after the UN, when this was the discussion in the United Nations, the sister of, I think, Nehru was there as the representative of India, and she was the biggest supporter of the interventionism, saying that morally we have rights to intervene in one country if that country is not liberal or creating threats to the neighbors or other countries. So do you think non-interventionism is possible? It can work?
In international politics, no, it's only a utopia. You can idealize it. You can, just create a whole kind of hype around this, but it's not possible not to intervene. If America is intervening, again, I'm not comparing any country, India, Pakistan, China, with America. It's a giant, it's a superpower, enormous resources and interest worldwide. But still, it's a justification for us as well. If America cannot stop itself invading and intervening overseas, then how you can opt for not intervening in your regional countries for your own interest in your next door neighbor. If you think in Afghanistan, if India is not intervening, it means it's leaving Afghanistan on the mercy of China and Pakistan. And if Pakistan is not intervening in Afghanistan, then there's same kind of situation for Pakistan. International politics are, I think, brutal in this sense, that it doesn't allow country to operate or do or follow its policy in any moral direction. So there is no morality. Only thing we can do, how we can control negative intervention in other country, is by letting international organization decide, or there is a whole concept of reward and punishment. If you are intervening negatively, you are supporting any military movement, any insurgency, any extremist group in another country, then international community is there to boycott you. United Nations is there to impose sanction on you. Same, like if India is intervening in Pakistan, it's illegitimate, definitely. You cannot stop it. It's India's interest to intervene and secure its regional and international interests by whatever means possible. But then international community is there. There are international law. There are some other institutions. It's not possible now to intervene. Economically, yes, it's very legitimate. Free market economy, economy forces are allowed to intervene in other countries. But of course, if you want to intervene for your very selfish interest, then there is certain kind of parameters there to use to stop you, to put a full stop on your intervention. So yeah, otherwise it's not possible. Every country wants to intervene.
Yeah, you are very right, Sadia. The game is not even. So we have one raised hand, Kaisar Rashid Saab.
Gee, Dr. Khan, I actually, my question obviously won't be academic. I'll be more on the anecdotal side. In fact, speaking of intervention, I mean, if we look at historically, most interventions have been very invasive. And I think there's a fundamental difference between intervention and invasion, being invasive. Sure. And there was an element of invasivism was very, like there was militarily and all sort of things. But if we look at contemporary intervention, there is less element of invasion in it. And here we touch upon concepts of economic colonization, for example, which you can see now emerging across the world. And I'm referring to China, for instance. Now, that intervention is very obvious. It gives you exactly a similar sort of power, and you achieve your objectives. And it's a bit soft. You get your soft image, in fact, going up as well if you do it properly. And you don't have to shed so much blood either. That's another benefit. So how would you reflect upon that? And I'm really, then I'll probably get on to my question once I hear that you can validate what I'm saying.
So, well, yeah, there's a difference in, invasion, military invasion, for example, or somehow intervention, economic intervention. But unfortunately, in our region, in South Asia, and our other regions around us, somehow we hear states and non-state actors both believe in very negative kind of intervention. Invasion is definitely something else, but states and non-state actors are um, more inclined to intervene in, internal affairs of other states. For example, if we are having any kind of conflict with any ethnic group or any regional unit within Pakistan or India or in Bangladesh or any other country, each states try to take benefit of it. Intervention economically, yes, their market economy should be, promoted, and that's why there were some efforts in 1990s and early 2000s to build a regime, common regime with SAFTA, or common free trade area and a free market through SARC platform and others. But it was not very successful, unfortunately, because of a negativity that is prevailing among masses, and then state is also somehow promoting states, not state, one state. So they are promoting the similar kind of policies. So not if invasion, military invasion, but we know how terrorist groups and from different region, from different countries, they were active in this region, and they were sabotaging all kind of efforts from the state or government, specific governments, if they were willing to open their economies, their markets for each other, to create a different kind of scenario, a better scenario where they can come up with a more constructive approach to resolve their disputes. But it was never very successful. Whenever there was dialogue or deliberation on Kashmir issue or any other dispute, Sir Creek or Siachen, always after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 months, there was terrorist attack, and that attack actually destroyed all the hard work. So economic intervention is of course ideal. That's how we can resolve our dispute, and that's how we can change the fate of our region. But unfortunately, illegal, illegitimate intervention from both countries, creating real tough time, creating hurdles in the way.
So now I get to my question now. I guess I don't think we can actually get too far with that. But my question was that now, when I think if I'm understanding it correctly from your topic, there's Indo-US strategic ties, and then we're trying to understand the enormity of intervention either through a cluster or US alone. Now, historically, for example, US at one stage was pretty close to Pakistan. And the synergy was that both Pakistan and US were able to combine, and in fact, an example of, say, Afghanistan back then against Russia is quite obvious. Whereas India does not they don't support that, and they have actually refused any military collaboration with US, and that's why they never sent their forces in Afghanistan. And that actually is a failure from US, it didn't actually support their doctrine. So how do you see that going in future, that relationship between US and India, and you see any legit intervention taking place in the future with that duo?
In Afghanistan?
Anywhere in the world for that matter. Doesn't have to be.
One thing we have to admit that India, is always very rational in its approach. Knowing that, Indian presence in Afghanistan was India's national interest, but India very tactically refused sending its troops in Afghanistan and later in Iraq as well. Despite that, India was depending on United States of America for its defense needs, and also, economically, America is the second largest trade partner of India. But knowing that refusing a superpower has its own, aftermaths. But diplomatically, they are very strong. They are very smart. So they offered their constructive, plans and projects in Afghanistan instead of indulging themselves or their military directly against, Taliban forces in Afghanistan, knowing that people of India would never allow that to any government at any cost. So if in last 2 decades, what India did in Afghanistan, people of Afghanistan admitted they respect India's, whether it's the parliament, constructing parliament building, or connectivity routes or India's indulgence in creating a alternative route to Central Asia, connecting Afghanistan to Central Asia. India was involved with all its will, but yes, it's India's, I think, smartness and its wisdom and their visionary leadership that they never let their military involved in Afghanistan. Though there were a lot of accusation that Indian spy agencies are very much active in Kandahar and Jalalabad through their consulates, but of course we don't have any kind of proof so far. And in future, if they are going to involve, no, again, India is now in a multipolar world, is in a better position to say no to the United States of America in case it is forcing India to get itself involved in any kind of military activity in region or beyond the region. And India is, I think America is also not willing to expand its powers, military muscles anywhere anymore in next 10, 20 years. I don't see any kind of intervention from America in any country. So there is no chance of military intervention, but yes, there is, again, counterbalancing strategies active. They have to counterbalance China, not only in South Asia, but worldwide, in in South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, and Middle East, in Africa even. India is even very active in African economy. So
Okay.
there's no possibility of such kind of alliance or such kind of invasion or intervention.
Thank you, Sadia. Sadia, we are going a very, you already answered to this Shoaib Ahmed's question. So can you answer in with few sentences? So can you please explain the approach of India towards China by determining the use of soft power and hard power? What is the approach of both China and India? Is it offensive or defensive? Thank you.
Well, if we see bilateral, so it's not offensive. Other than very, limited kind of border skirmishes or clashes 2 years back, there's no such kind of, border activity or military fight there. But when it comes to, and loose kind of alliances with the United States of America to counterbalance China and Chinese might, then yes, there could be, a very offensive kind of approach. But again, now it's complex politics. Knowing that China and India are members of BRICS, they are members, in SCO. So it won't be easier for India and China to, start any kind of aggressive policy or aggression in their bilateral matters. In multilateral matters, yes, maybe, but it could be possible only through economic tactics. There's no chance of any kind of war between the two countries, or war between India, China, or US, supporting India against China. But yes, we are living in that century where countries prefer going to trade wars than in border skirmishes.
Yeah, but Sadia, the situation I think is changing. I mean, for example, the Chinese intervention in Taiwan means the threat is increasing with the time, and also the China is expanding its the muscles, not only in the South Asia but also in the nearby ocean territories. So that's why before it nobody was expecting any kind of threat from China, because China was saying all the time we are following the non-interventionist policy and we are just focused on our economic benefits. But now nobody thinks that China is true in that sense. So I think the recent development in the alliances is just to follow China and give protection to US allies. For example, the Taiwan and the Australia is also facing threat due to the Chinese expansion. So this is our discussion, we can do any other time. So for now, for the conclusion of this session, and to say formally thanks to the the audience, I would like to introduce Monal Khyal Khatak. She is the assistant professor at the Bahauddin University Multan, and she will conclude the session. Ji Mona.
Hello, everyone. So, first of all, thank you very much, Pakistan Social Sciences Forum, for providing me the opportunity to sum up this session. I'm really grateful to all the participants who joined in this session. So, our session today was Indo-US strategic ties and India's preeminence in South Asia. Dr. Sadia Khan, thank you so much for having such an elaborate presentation and for sharing such detailed aspects of this topic. It was really enlightening to all of us. I really enjoyed the question answer session also. What my takeaway from this session was, first of all, that Indian hegemonic tendencies, its strength and weaknesses, they have two aspects. One, when during the bipolar system, India was tilted towards the Soviet Union and it had a bit of a socialist tendency in its economic and political policy as well. Secondly, that during the unipolar system, when America became the superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union, India was encouraged as a hegemon in South Asia. The reasons Dr. Sadia Khan mentioned why United States supported India in the quest of its hegemonic tendency was counterbalancing China, the counter narrative of terrorism after 9/11, the civil nuclear agreement that the United States of America and India signed, and United States also saw India beyond the context of South Asia because obviously India has a huge population and huge needs for energy. So the lines of transportation, the word used by Sadia was the line of transportations were very important. And if India had a hold or a control on these lines of transportation, that would go far ahead in future, uh, keeping in view the economic aspects of India and US strategic ties. She also mentioned the problems why India cannot be a hegemon in Saudi Asia, and she believes that Indian legitimacy towards being a regional hegemon can be questioned because the regional states of the in South Asia, the neighboring states of South Asia, they have a certain mistrust towards India. They do not accept India as a hegemon, which Dr. Sadia Khan have used the theory of Cox and the Gramscian approach, that which is very important for any state to become a hegemon regionally or globally. Secondly, she believes that because Indian national policy is not unified and they have certain problems when it comes to the secessionist movements going on in India, when it comes to Indian people having a non consensual approach towards their own policy. So that shows that there isn't any unity when it comes to the Indian population. Thirdly, she comes up with economic instability, and she believes that because a huge chunk of Indian population is living below the poverty line, that means that India is not that economically stable as it portrays itself. And the territorial and border issues of India with its neighbors, again, which can be related to the first problem, the consent of other states, is not are not yet resolved. So obviously, India do not have political influence, which is very important for a hegemon. Lastly, she believes that after the rise of China, it seems highly unlikely for India to become a regional hegemon. So Dr. Sadia Khan have also used the theoretical framework of structural realism, and she believes that international structure have played a very important role when it comes to Indian role in its national as well as foreign sphere. So that was all about Dr. Sadia Khan's session. And I once again thank you all very much to be a part of this enlightening session. That was all from my side. Thank you very much.